this was in the mid-90s, and the whole stalking thing was you know, very big then, and they'd set up this threat management unit, the LAPD, to deal with mostly, well, some ordinary people, but a lot of the time it was stars, celebrities, you know, who were being stalked. And it was about an English actress who was playing a cop on an American homicide series in LA, being stalked by some crazy. I liked it, but you know, it bombed. It was terrible. It was only ever published in Canada. Nobody else wanted to touch it.
I'm not sure I've ever read it. I think I do remember you're talking about it.
Practically impossible to get hold of. I mean, it is still in print in Canada. It was published then by Penguin, and you know, they keep the paperback in print. So I'm sure that you can get it from Sleuth of Baker Street.
The great Canadian, Great Toronto Mystery Bookstore.
Great Toronto Mystery Bookstore, yeah.
Well, you have once, I think, brought Banks to Toronto. Was that, I don't remember, was it Wednesday's trial?
No, it was the Hanging Valley.
That was it. Okay. I know it was early on, where he came over to pursue some, I guess it was some thread of the case where the criminal had, or somebody had gone to Canada. Yeah,
he was looking for friends of an expatriate, and who he knew was had been living in Toronto. So he thought the best place to look was the English-type pubs in Toronto, and there were plenty of them. I think I wrote that in about 1988, and of course now there are far more. I mean, his liver just couldn't handle that search now, but then he could do it, and it was fun. I mean, it was fun. I hadn't been there that long then, you know, so for me it was fun to kind of look back and see what struck me about Toronto the first time I saw it, and put that into Banks's voice.
It's such a wonderful city. It's so cosmopolitan in so many different aspects. You know, it mirrors all kinds of other cultures and languages, and I know the restaurants, you know, you can eat virtually any kind of cuisine, whatever. Have you ever thought about writing something about, you know, a whole book in Toronto? No,
simply because I think you put it very well, is that it's too diverse for me to grasp. I just can't, and I don't really think anyone's done it yet. I mean, there are some books that are set in Toronto, and they tend to go for a certain section, maybe even a certain area or a certain cultural part of Toronto, and it's very, very difficult to take it all in. I mean, Eric Wright, a Toronto writer, used to have a series featuring a detective called Charlie Salter, and he stopped doing those a few years ago, and they're excellent books.
They are.
They were very, I mean, Eric was English originally, and the books were very much like sort of English village mysteries set in Toronto, and we've had darker versions of Toronto, but I don't think anyone's really, you know, got a handle on the city yet. It is so diverse, and it is so difficult to move from one level to another very easily, and to grasp all its dark corners. You know, I mean, I'd have to do more research than I would writing about Yorkshire.
Yeah, you've always been in kind of an interesting position because, you know, you're a leading light of the Canadian crime writers community. You've won Arthur Ellis Awards. You know, you're a very distinguished writer in Canada, and yet I think most Americans think you're British. You know, that you're from Yorkshire.
Well, they do, yeah. But I mean, that's because one of the things about being a Canadian writer is that it allows you to write about where you come from, because a lot of Canadian writers are from other countries, and a lot of the books they write when they're settled in Canada, and I'm talking mostly, you know, what they would call literature, because they're a bit disparaging about genre fiction in Canada, so they wouldn't consider it. But they come from, you know, whether it's Sri Lanka, Jamaica, Africa, wherever, and a lot of Canadian literature is set in a lot of these places and is regarded as Canadian literature, you know, not Sri Lankan literature or whatever. And the writers become famous for that within Canada, and I assume also within the countries they came from. But nobody cares about Yorkshire. It's just, you know, not that cool. Well, besides, it's genre writing.
Well, you and Reginald Hill have done really well with Yorkshire.
We've done all right, yeah.
Thinking, you know, that I've sort of watched with interest Louise Penny become very popular in the States, writing essentially village mysteries, although they're
Quebec, yeah.
Yeah, they're Québécois, and they're very quirky and very, very interesting. But she is writing about French Canada. Kathy Reichs does some stuff in Montreal and, you know, that part of Canada. Vicki Delaney, one of our authors, wrote a book last year, set out in I think it's British Columbia.
Right.
In a small town that, I mean, she gave it a fictional name, but it's a town somewhere not too far over the American border where there are a lot of Americans, some of whom left during the Vietnam War and didn't go back after amnesty and, you know, tourist community and all that. But, you know, a big body of literature where Canada is a living landscape, at least in crime, doesn't really emerge.
No, it's taking time. So there's also a new writer, Inga Wolf, who it's a pseudonym for, they say, a well-known literary writer, a book called The Calling, which is a sort of serial killer in cottage country and sort of really across Canada, but a lot of it's in northern Ontario. You know, it's such a big, diverse country, and its crime fiction is relatively new, and certainly not encouraged.
Right.
So
Aren't
it's
the
taking
major
time to develop.
audiences really American for you and for Louise? I think,
Yeah.
you know, you have a much bigger readership here, which, why you're here, and going to the LA Times Book Festival. Louise, certainly, her major audience really is in America.
But, you know, for a lot of Canadian crime writers, it's very hard to break out of that very small market that is Canada. They would like to be as popular as Louise or me.
There are a lot of distribution problems. I mean, as a bookseller, it's very difficult to secure books from Canadian publishers. It's also very difficult to export books into Canada. There's a duty on books which doesn't exist with other countries, and so, you know, it's more awkward to do business across literary business.
Yeah, they make it difficult with wine too. All the good things in life, I think.
Really?
Yeah, it's. I had last time I was in Australia. It was a very long and involved story. I found myself stuck in the middle of nowhere, and Margaret Lehman, Peter Lehman's wife, sort of rescued me. And they're winemakers in the Barossa Valley,
wine.
wonderful wines. And I'd had Banks drink a glass of their wine in one of my books. So they made me their guest for the weekend, took me for a tasting, and you know, it's the first time I've ever gained anything. All those years mentioning Theakston's, not a free pint, you know, Lafroig, not a free bottle. But anyway, they wanted to send me some wine to Canada, and it was so difficult. They tried to do it through my publisher, they tried to do it, and of course in the end, because they do export as a business to Canada, they really had to do it through their business. They just couldn't send it to me. You can't send me a bottle of wine because I don't have a liquor import license. Could you believe it?
You know, I can, because Arizona, oddly enough, is exactly the same.
Is it really?
Yes, yeah. This is a sort of, you know, liquor-isolated island here right in the middle of the United States. But, yeah, I've often thought that Canada would do well to abandon its tariffs and its, you know, kind of that policy, and if it were far more open and there was a much greater flow of American and Canadian authors and fiction back and forth, that it would actually be better for Canadian writers rather than...
Oh, it probably would, yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, the bookshops were having a lot of problems recently when the dollars became very close, because, you know, obviously you can't change them very quickly on the back of a book, so you've got quite a wide disparity between Canadian and US price, and, you know, people didn't like that. They said, why can't I pay that price?
I noticed looking at your website, and I had forgotten about it, that, I mean, I knew that you had written lots of short stories because, as we've already said, you won your Edgar Award for short stories. I had forgotten that you had written 2 volumes of poetry.
Oh, that was years and years and
years ago. It was years ago, but nevertheless, I thought one of the reasons, I think that, you know, an ear or rhythm for language really makes a difference between sort of pedestrian books and really wonderful books. And you've got the music thing we know about that I think helps inform your dialogue and the way your books flow. But the poetry, I'm sure, you know, has had a lot to do also with the way that you handle words.
I think that energy got sort of channeled in there. And I don't write much poetry anymore. I mean, it's not unusual in crime writers. John Harvey's a fine poet as well as a crime writer.
And musician.
Your own Jim Salas. I mean, you know, in Phoenix, is also still publishes poetry and crime fiction. So it's not that unusual a coexistence. I mean, I scribble fragments every now and then. I've not worked on a full completed poem for some time, but I do think that, yeah, the energy and you know, certainly the view of landscape and stuff that I was putting into the poetry is sort of channeled into the novels.